gender difference is the key component of marriage. Gender within the biblical understanding of humanity had a functional reality behind it, which is most profoundly manifested within the most intimate of human relationships, marriage. Although people of the same sex can be friends, and the Bible understands and expects them to be friends, when it comes to intimate companionship and physical intimacy, Scripture's clear. Genesis 1:27. In the image of God, he made him, male and female, he created them. Gender is an essential key component, I would say the key component of marriage. Parts of our culture have made the deliberate decision to define marriage as any union of commitment between loving adults. But marriage, as understood biblically, has as foundational to its true nature the reality of gender. It's built on gender. Marriage is constructed on gender differences. Through the creation story, God linked marriage to gender in an inseparable way. So in creation, we see this link between marriage and gender. God connects them inseparably. How does he do this? How does God link marriage with gender inseparably? Through tying marriage to the divine duty of procreation. Procreation demands biological difference. It demands it. Someone who identifies as a male cannot produce sperm. Someone who identifies as a female but is not a female does not have ovaries and cannot produce an egg, nor do they have a womb. I don't care how they identify. They don't possess those things. By the way, this is one of the reasons why our culture, I don't know if you've seen this, but our culture is desperately trying to disconnect penises from a male and wombs from a female. They want to separate that. Why? They know that the biological determinativeness of who we are is manifested in these things, and they're seeking to overthrow the reality of what our biology communicates to us. Transgenderism cannot survive in the face of science. So what the world does is it attempts to change the science. Right? That is why Christians must be cautious about the modern infatuation with the unquestionable authority of science. When the unsaved world wants its will done, it just changes the science and calls you a barbarian. Got to be careful. We got to be careful about our embrace that science is never wrong. Because the unsaved world tweaks science for its will and then says you're crazy. Back to my point. It was not upon biological identity which God founded marriage, but on biological reality. In the first creation account, Genesis chapter 1, God gave the explicit purpose behind his deliberate act of making them male and female. Why did God make them male and female? What was God's purpose in making them male? Genesis 1:27 says he made them male and female. Well, why? Well, Genesis 1:28 answers that question. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth. God went from male and female straight to procreation. Don't pass go. Don't come up with something else. Marriage in the Bible's worldview is clearly between a man and woman because procreation is at the core of what it's about. The second creation account also does the same thing, and it's fascinating because it's more detailed, and you have to carefully read it, but you see the same link between gender difference and marriage. Let's look at Genesis 2. As you know, the story of Genesis 2 expands and gives more detail to the summary statement found in Genesis 1, verse 27. Let me summarize the details for you. First off, the man was actually created first. We see that in Genesis 2, 5 through 7. And he's created from the ground itself, right? Answering the issue of the ground's need for cultivation. The ground needed to be cultivated, and Adam is the answer to that fact. We see that in verse 8 and in verse 15 of Genesis 2. The woman was then created second, and she's created, notice, from the man, rather than from the ground directly, answering the problem of the man's need for a helper that corresponded to him. So first off, the ground had a need, so God created the man from the ground. Then Adam had a need, so God created the woman from him. That's Genesis 2, 18 through 23. Within the context of the creation accounts, the most fundamental duty that man could not do on his own, for which he needed a partner to accomplish it, is the duty of procreation. That is the fundamental duty he cannot do by himself. It's impossible. Genesis 1:28 makes this clear. He cannot reproduce himself without a helper suitable. It's no wonder then that after the details of the creation were mapped out in Genesis 2, God then makes a statement about marriage. So God lays out the creation of the man, then the creation of the woman, and then notice what he says in verse 24. After all that's over, he says, "For this cause a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Without gender difference, there's no such thing as marriage. Let me say that again. Without gender difference, there's no such thing as marriage. Now, the implications of this are truly profound. Simply put, gender without functional capability is not gender but confusion. In Holy Scripture, gender is linked inseparably to the capacity to reproduce the race. Now, this is true in spite of the fact that in a small number of cases, barrenness may inflict an individual. An individual may be barren. But that only proves my point. Why? Because barrenness could only make sense because of the biological expectation that procreational function is normal. I mean, what's the whole issue of barrenness? Barrenness is a person can't reproduce. Well, why is that barrenness? Because it's normative for reproduction. Reproduction is a normative function of humanity, and barrenness only proves that point. It doesn't disprove what I've argued.